it gives me pleasure to introduce Tania Marshall to talk about SAM codes, and I guess this really goes to things like compliance. We've talked about it a little bit. That here and there's been some discussion about, raising money or spending shareholders' money to go and mine or explore for new diamond deposits. So Tania this afternoon is now going to talk about the evaluation of diamond deposits according to the SAMREC codes. Just by way of background, Tania has a PhD from the University of Witwatersrand in 1990, and she then formed a consulting company in 1996 called Explorations Unlimited. She has a vast amount of experience in this business. She also has experience in other minerals, obviously, but I think her first love and interest has always been diamonds. You've also seen plenty of Tania during the course, and so without further ado, Tania, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, John. Right, folks, so over the last 2 weeks, you've had a number of speakers highlighting issues of resource estimation, code compliance. And today we're going to review some of the basics of the evaluation of diamond deposits according to the SAMREC code. Now, since we've got a number of students on board, I'm going to give a brief introduction as to what the codes are and how they developed. So to start with, I'd like to take you back to the late 1960s, to the heady days of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and the Poseidon nickel bubble. At that time, the Vietnam War was in full swing. The price of nickel was climbing daily as materials were needed to support the war effort. Then in Australia, there was a company called Poseidon, and they struck what looked to be a decent-sized nickel deposit. That was back in 1969. In 1 year, and this was based more on corporate promotion than any real technical data, their shares on the Australian Stock Exchange rose from 80 cents a share to over $280. And that was before they'd even started production. But that was when things started to go pear-shaped. The mining and extraction costs were higher than expected. The grade was much lower than initially thought. And to make matters worse, the Vietnam War ended and the nickel price crashed. So within 5 years of operations, the company imploded, was delisted from the ASX, and its investors lost millions. After the investigation into this, it was noted that if there had been more robust technical reporting procedures, these problems could all have been avoided. And as a result, the JORC code was born in 1989. And this was now a guide to what information was needed for any company reporting on the Australian Stock Exchange. Fast forward then a few years to Indonesia, where a Canadian junior company called Bre-X identified a gold deposit at Busang in Borneo. Over the next year or so, the geologist, one Michael de Guzman, initiated the most elaborate fraud in the history of mining, worth over $6 billion. Please do yourself a favor and watch one of the many videos or movies about this scam. See how gold was salted and the lengths that he went to try and prevent its discovery. Long story short, in 1997, the fraud was uncovered, the company collapsed, and shareholders lost billions. De Guzman committed suicide, or did he escape to a private island in the Caribbean? Your choice. One of the other directors ran off to the Bahamas, but he soon died of a stroke. The third was the only one to face formal charges, but he was acquitted. This fraud convinced Canadian authorities to regulate reporting practices, and the SIM codes and subsequently the NI 43-101 was created as a set of rules to protect investors from mineral project disclosures. So against this background, South Africa developed the SAM codes. These are the South African Mineral Reporting Codes. Basically a set of principles and requirements guiding how public reports on mineral properties need to be written. It shows you what sort of information you need to put into a report if you're writing it for investors or potential investors. These principles and guidelines are primarily applicable for a document written for the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. But they also apply pretty much to any document that has the potential to land up in the public domain. The SAM codes are South African specific, but they are similar to the codes that you require for other jurisdictions. And they also fall under the CRISCO umbrella, where CRISCO is the international body that has oversight of all resource and reserve reporting codes. The SAMREC code is one of the 3 codes that make up the SAM codes. It deals with the public reporting of solid minerals, and that obviously covers diamonds. Now, in terms of the SAMREC code, my pointer, in terms of the SAMREC code, in addition to all the generic requirements for all minerals and metals, there are also quite a few diamond-specific issues, which are highlighted in a diamond-specific section. But in addition to that, we have a diamond guideline that deals with requirements in addition to the standard SAMREC code. This guideline also looks at other gemstones, at least in terms of principles and generalities. You are all no doubt familiar with this figure. It's the basis for all reporting classifications, starting off with exploration results, going through the different classes of resources as we increase our level of geoscientific knowledge and confidence. And then we move across to reserves after applying technical studies based on a series of modifying factors. You'll also note that within the diamond-specific area, SAMREC has diamond resources and diamond reserves as opposed to simple mineral resources and reserves. Okay, so we're going to start off with the exploration results, which is pretty much any information that you can generate through doing an exploration program. And we're looking at all sorts of information from survey data, remote sensing, geophysics, sampling, analytical testing, and so on and so forth, as well as the diamond-specific information that we have. Some of the important things about reporting exploration results is that you're not to present these in a way that implies that it's potentially economic. So the use of terms resource, reserve, and mine are pretty much not what you want to use. You must include all relevant data. You don't get to decide at this stage what is important for people to know. Tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly, and allow them to draw the conclusions based on the information that you provide. In addition to the work that you have been doing on the project, you can also include historical data and information, but only if the competent person who's writing the report considers that it is relevant and reliable, and also giving reasons for such conclusions. And here we have the example, the extreme example of you wouldn't use historical information going back to the turn of the century to look at an area either in Kimberley or down along the Middle Orange River. You can also include information from adjacent or nearby properties. Again, if you can demonstrate relevance and justification. Now, in this particular picture here, if this was your project using grades and values from this adjacent property would not be applicable. You'd look at things that had a similar geological setting, similar bedrock conditions, or depositional environment. And also, we're looking for at least some physical evidence of assumed continuity. Because simply because your property might be adjacent to one where there is a dike or a gravel doesn't necessarily provide justification of continuity. Here we have a kimberlite dike, and it's assumed that there is your concession. You can't simply assume that that dike runs through your property, because it might not. The importance of exploration results is that companies often use them to generate exploration targets, which are generally discussed in terms of size and type. And here there's pretty much no difference to any other minerals. SAMREC allows for the discussion of two varieties of exploration targets. The first one is the conceptual target, which is based purely on a desktop study. Such exploration targets need not represent any discovered mineralization. It might simply be a conceptual target. However, the concept must be realistic. For example, you wouldn't generate a kimberlite target in the middle of a subduction zone or a marine deposit in a low wave energy environment, not unless you had some really good reasons, which we would expect you to discuss. The second variety of exploration target is mineralization with a capital M. Now, whereas the conceptual target is based purely on a desktop study, mineralization is where you've identified a specific target based on actual prospecting results. But you might not have enough technical information to declare a resource, or you may not have demonstrated realistic prospects of eventual economic extraction. To repeat, mineralization is a subset of exploration target. It is not a low confidence resource. And the reason why we developed the term mineralization is specifically to allow small operators to discuss their preliminary results in a public forum, to give them a way to describe what it is they're doing, showing their results without trying to shoehorn it into a resource category that it doesn't fit. SAMREC calls this mineralization with a capital M. JORC calls it pre-resource mineralization, and other codes don't differentiate from conceptual targets at all and simply just call everything exploration target. In fact, here we've got an example of how you can look at it. So this is the Catalan kimberlite complex in Brazil, where you have two geophysical anomalies that have actually been drilled. So you at least know that they are kimberlite. So these would be classified as pre-resource mineralization, whereas these targets out here, looking at the geophysics and where it lies, most likely kimberlite, but we can't say for certain because there's no hole in it. So these would be the conceptual targets. It's very useful to use for a company to show its exploration pipeline, because outside of here, Catalan 1 at the time was a kimberlite in a mineral resource. The company would then be able to show that these two were next in line to be bulk sampled, and these two anomalies here were to be drilled to determine whether they were kimberlites or not. The other thing about exploration targets is that we can use indicator minerals, kimberlitic indicator minerals. Now, once and for all, indicator minerals are not applicable to alluvial or marine deposits. They are used to provide indirect evidence for potential occurrence within primary kimberlites. You can't use them to infer a diamond grade or a value at resource estimation classification, and it has limited implication for project value. So to summarize exploration targets, there are a bunch of things that you can or can't say, and we don't want to misrepresent it or misconstrue it. Don't make it look better than it actually is. When it comes to looking at volume, tonnage, grade values, these all need to be presented as a range. Because you know so little about the project at this stage, you can't give a single figure. And note, we're not talking about ranges as a statistical measure. It's simply the range between the smallest and the largest result in our samples. You also need to state the volume, the grade, and the diamond value. You can't quote one without the other. The example here is if this is our diamond deposit, we've got a volume and we have grade, the value is going to be extremely different depending upon the value of your diamonds. Okay, so moving then on to the reporting of diamond resources. According to SAMREC, that's the definition of a diamond resource. So the first thing we need to look at is reasonable prospects for eventual economic extraction. So if you're going to declare a resource, your project must have reasonable prospects for eventual economic extraction, RPEEE. And the way we find that out is we demonstrate that through a high-level reasoned assessment that it has potential to be economic. We use the term high-level assessment. We're not looking for a scoping study, definitely not a pre-feas or a feasibility study, but very definitely more than we simply believe that the project could be economical. When looking at RPEEE, we really need to answer the question, is there a fatal flaw that prevents this project from being a commercial success? So we would look at all of these features here, geological, mining, processing, various other issues, to see if there is potentially a fatal flaw in any of these issues. Excuse me. The term eventual economic extraction asks the question, can this deposit be mined now or only at some defined time in the future? So we would look at all of these issues and see whether any problems that we have could be resolved in the future. We're not talking about an undefined time scale. Could it be resolved in 300 years' time? Typically, for a kimberlite, we'd be looking at less than 10 years, and alluvials generally 3 to 5 years. I want to highlight too that some of the other codes don't use reasonable prospects for eventual economic extraction. They've left out the term eventual and simply use reasonable prospects for economic extraction, meaning that the project has to be commercially now and not at some time in the future. The second thing we look at in our resource definition would be the geological model, drilling and sampling. We don't tell you in terms of SAMREC how many holes you have to drill, how many samples, how big the sample has to be. That is obviously dependent upon the geology of your specific site. And yes, you're going to have different parameters for different deposits, depending upon the shape, the grade variation, the number of different facies or geological domains. I want to highlight this one here. In complex deposits, it might be very difficult to ensure that the samples taken are truly representative of the whole deposit. And this is specifically true of alluvial deposits, but some kimberlites as well. Now, in such complex deposits, you are going to need to do much more drilling and sampling than you would expect to do on a more simple deposit type. Okay, the next thing is that a diamond resource cannot be estimated in the absence of reliable, verifiable sampling information from the property or the geological unit in question. So again, from a diamond resource point of view, you can't determine a grade based on the production data from an adjacent body or a guy next door. So if this was your kimberlite that you were looking to evaluate, you wouldn't be able to base a resource on information from these kimberlites over here. And in an alluvial setting, yes, you can see that people have mined here, and you may have anecdotal information about so many carats per 100 ton people thought came out of there. But unless you can verify that, you can't use it as a resource estimate. Estimating volume also needs to be based more than on pure remote sensing or geophysics alone. So in this example here, you wouldn't be able to put an envelope around your gravel areas and say, okay, that's our resource volume. Neither for a kimberlite, put a line around it and model it. Even if you have some really great geophysical modeling, you need to have some corroborating drilling or pitting data. Obviously, the better your modeling, the fewer drill holes you need to put down, but there does need to be some physical corroboration of the geophysics or the remote sensing. We speak about realistic extrapolation around data points. So if we go back to our alluvial system, if we had a single hole over here and a single hole over there, and we extrapolated that to the entire deposit, that is not realistic. Neither is the spotted dog situation. The last thing that we start looking at is disclosing the basis of classification for each category that we use. Use the standard classification schemes, inferred, indicated, and measured for a diamond resource. And just to note that in many cases, probably in most cases, measured resources and proved reserves is not appropriate for diamond deposits. And in marine deposits, sometimes even indicated is also a bridge too far. Just to note, when we look at diamond reserves, we have probable and proved. That is proved with a D. Proved with a D is South African, it's European, and it's Australian. Proven with an N is North American. When we talk about grades, you can talk about it in terms of volume, area, or mass. But if you do use tonnage, then we need to have as much information as possible about how you've addressed these density issues. In any sort of resource statement or tabulation, volume or tonnage, grade, and quality or value need to be disclosed. You also need to, or you can't disclose only the included carats unless you have spoken about quantity and grade as well. Any statement of resource must include the bottom cutoff size, and you cannot include exploration targets or historical estimates in a resource statement. Moving down from inferred through to measured, we need to look at the increasing level of geoscientific knowledge and confidence. And this is based really upon the amount of sampling as well as the uncertainty in demonstrating spatial relationships. And nowhere is this more important than when you're looking at low-grade large stone deposits. We don't tell you what classification criteria to use. That's entirely determined by the competent person based on their experience, their competence, industry best practice, and so forth. But we do ask you to justify it, explain it to us, justify it. Because the classification criteria are important so that readers can make up their own mind if they agree with your classification. When it comes to estimation techniques, we don't tell you what estimation techniques to use or how to use them. We simply ask for transparency in their application. And again, this is particularly important when you use new, non-standard or little understood methodologies. Here we need you to explain in detail what you are doing and justify why it's the best way for your specific deposit. When we look at diamonds, this is mostly applicable in grade and value models. Don't just gloss over your methodology and assume that everyone is just as au fait with the method as you are. Remember, you're writing for the educated layman. And especially when it comes to geostatistical estimations, while these are very common and well known in kimberlite and marine deposits, if you are applying geostats to an alluvial deposit, we will need you to justify its applicability. Microdiamonds. Again, microdiamonds are not applicable to secondary deposits. SAMREC tells us that a diamond resource classification requires both diamond grade and diamond value. And it's diamond grade you can estimate using microdiamonds, but diamond value requires macro diamonds. You cannot get a diamond valuation based on microdiamonds. So if you're on an exploration program and you've got microdiamond data, but you've not yet bulk sampled to recover sufficient macros, you cannot declare a diamond resource at that stage. Having said that we need macro diamonds before we can estimate value and thus declare a diamond resource, there are circumstances where you can extrapolate grade and value without having a sufficiently large parcel of macros. And these are generally where you've got geological homogeneity and continuity, a preliminary SFD, and also, again, justification and explanation in detail. Just to note that there is no such thing as an in-situ production grade. Often we see reports where a sample grade has been taken and multiplied by one or other fudge factor based on an assumed process efficiency to get a theoretical in-situ grade, and that grade is then carved in stone as the project grade. Macro diamond grade is very dependent on the technology used. We often see disparities between grades from a bulk sampling, which might have been done maybe on a rotary pan plant. And then they come back and do some trial mining, which has been done on a different technique, such as the DMS or the Burovesnik. In your reporting, it's really important to state the processing method, the processing efficiencies, and then also show reconciliations as processing methods change. And no matter what method you use, please don't forget to state the bottom cutoff screen size. And if you are basing your recovered grades based on factors associated with microdiamond content, then simply tell us all the details. And when you refer to diamond sizes, it's useful for the competent person to discuss which sizing definition they are using. And if you're using more than one system, such as Tyler mesh or square mesh for grade, and DTC or grainers for value. Put up a simple table. It certainly helps people to understand the correlations or conversions between them. These are the definitions of inferred, indicated, and measured diamond resources. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail regarding them. I simply want to highlight two features. For all three, inferred, indicated, and diamond, there needs to be information regarding quantity, tonnage or volume, as well as grade and average diamond value. And this is quite different to other commodities where you may simply present quantity and quality. Here, we definitely need value. Also fundamental to the definition is the size of the parcel of diamonds that you've used to value. And here is where SAMREC gives some guidance on the size of parcel that should be used to value at any particular classification level. So for an inferred diamond resource, a minimum of 500 carats is recommended. And for an indicated diamond resource, anything between 1,000 and 2,500, depending upon the variability of your deposit. Those are guidelines. But under certain circumstances, you're obviously going to need to use a much larger parcel if your variability is extremely high. But if you do so, please, the CP needs to discuss the rationale behind the numbers that they have selected and the level of confidence, all of which, of course, is based upon a size frequency distribution. And so for all resource classification levels, please provide a diamond size frequency distribution. And this is for kimberlites, for alluvials, for marine, for any level of classification. And again, we give some guidance, and these are pretty much the same numbers as you have seen in the previous slide. And just to note how an SFD can change depending upon the numbers, have a look at this size frequency here. All three of these lines are from exactly the same deposit. The green line is at 500 carats. The blue line is at 2,500 carats. And the red line is at 50,000 carats. So do be aware of size frequency distribution diagrams at low numbers of diamonds. With respect to parcel value, it's obvious, but not always the case. Must be on a representative run-of-mine parcel. Don't only select out the gem quality plus 10 caraters. Also your bottom cutoff size. So the valuation must be the same as for your grade estimation, obviously when you're working with macro diamonds. So don't do your grade on 2 mil cutoff and your valuation on a 6 mil cutoff. The valuation needs to be less than 6 months old. And here's an old diagram by Zimnisky Paul, who shows very clearly that if you do your valuation at this date, that you present it here or here, you're going to be wrong. So you want your valuation date as close to your presentation date as possible. There are, again, occasions where you can revalue or look at value frequency curves and base value on current data. Diamonds, and especially the gemstone varieties, are greatly affected by economic conditions, whether they be global, such as COVID, the 2008 stock exchange crash, the current war in Europe, but it can also be affected by major local or regional events. So just be aware of what is happening and look at the relevance of the timing of your valuation. Technical studies, these are based on SAMREC tables 1 and 2. Whether it be a scoping, a pre-feas, or a feasibility study, you'll find the information in the SAMREC tables. This is effectively a study of the various modifying factors that will take your in situ kimberlite and convert it into a mineable reserve. Technical studies of diamonds look at exactly the same features as any other commodity. Just a note on bulk sampling and trial mining. Typically, the term bulk sampling refers to the resource estimation program. This is taking it from an exploration target to an inferred resource classification. And it really is the scoping study that supports progress to trial mining. The trial mining, this is where you upgrade your inferred resources to indicated resources, and it pretty much is, particularly in the alluvial space, the trial mining is the pre-feasibility study that can convert your indicated resources to probable reserves. There's not a whole bunch of difference between bulk sampling and trial mining, except perhaps the scale. And as you can see here, you can move from a bulk sampling operation through a trial mining and into a full-scale operation without much ado. So having done your technical study, you can convert your diamond resource to a diamond reserve, and the requirements are no different from reserve estimation on any other deposit type. Maybe just the scale when it comes to smaller deposits. So to summarize, anything pre-resource, historical estimates, exploration targets, mineralizations, you cannot do a technical study on them, and they cannot be converted to a reserve. An inferred diamond resource, you can do a scoping study on it, but it cannot be converted into a reserve. An indicated diamond resource, you can do a pre-feas or a feasibility study on it to get to a probable diamond reserve, and a measured diamond resource can be converted to a proved diamond resource, again through the application of the applicable studies. Just a few notes on the actual writing up of your competent person's report after you've done the evaluation. The formatting, SAMREC does give guidance on the chapter headings that you could use over here, but it is not a requirement. You could also use the table 1 headings if you preferred, or you may have a personal preference, or you might be working for a company that has a corporate standard. That is not a problem. The only thing that we require is that you do not fill out table 1 JORC style. That is not acceptable under the SAMREC code. Also, I just want to highlight here the use of plain language in writing up a report. Yes, there is necessary jargon and necessary technical content, but write to facilitate understanding, not to obfuscate. This is the SAMREC table 1, and you'll see the different sections and the information required under each section. Section 10 looks at the reporting of diamonds and gemstones. Please note that this information needs to be included in each of these sections. It is not a separate section. So you don't write your normal CPR with all this other information and then add on section 10. This must all be incorporated. Table 1 can be downloaded from the website as an Excel spreadsheet. Now, you do not have to fill out Table 1 every occasion. It's for first-time reporting and material change reports. And effectively, what we're asking you to do with Table 1 is, under the report section, just put the chapter where you have written about it. You don't have to write details in there, just where did you cover this? If it's not applicable to your report, just put in there, not applicable, reason being. It's what we call filling it out on an if not, why not basis. Code compliance should be viewed as a protection to the investor, to the general public, and also to the competent person and the company who is producing the report, because it helps you to know what is relevant, what's important, and it's there to prevent complaints against you. The codes are not designed to be onerous, but as I said, as a protection. After all, would you buy a house where the wiring was not up to code? Would you work in a mine where the safety is substandard? So why would you want to be part of a project that is not prepared according to a code? And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tania. Questions and answers? Who wants to kick off? Okay, so I'll kick off, Tania. I mean, how are these compliance systems working today? I mean, are you seeing more and more buy-in and people doing it properly? And my second question is always in these things is, you know, accountability and holding those people who you know, mislead the public or misspend their funds to account. You know, so often you hear of you know, shady deals, if we can call it that, but we never see any consequences. You've got perhaps comment on that.
Okay, let me start off by talking about the application of the codes. We've certainly seen in the documents going to the stock exchange a major improvement. A number of years ago, when the readers panel was first set up, looking at all reports that went into the JSE, we noted that it took at least 3, 4, 5, 6 times going through the readers panel before reports were considered good enough to actually put on the exchange. Over the last couple of years, we've noticed that the majority of documents go through the readers panel in 2, maybe 3 times. Some of the, many more of them go through the first time. So there is greater application of the codes. And we would like to think that it is because people are becoming more understanding of what the codes are and what the codes are about. One of the shortfalls of codes, and this goes for codes all over the place, is that they are applicable to stock exchanges. They can be controlled by stock exchanges, state departments, companies. But when they get out into the public domain by people who are writing for smaller companies who are not listed, we've got no big stick with which to, what I'm looking for. We can't control it. We've got no way to control it. The issues with complaints, yes, we all see lots of things wrong with reports. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, but if you don't complain to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange or the SAMREC Standards Committee, there's nothing that they can do. the standard, the SSC, the SAM Code Standards Committee, we do not have the time or the energy to go and read every report and hunt down people who do things wrong. If you see something that you do not believe is correct, write us a formal letter and we can do something about it. There's a question here from Kitani. Are the 3 SAM codes applied to diamond mines, or they're mining coal or something else? The SAM codes, the SAMREC code is applicable to all solid minerals. There's a diamond-specific section looking at diamonds. There's a coal-specific section looking at coal. And there's a generic section that looks at most other things. There's also a specific section that looks at industrial minerals. There is one that looks at the valuation of deposits. And then there's the oil and gas code as well. Brooke, you have a question?
Oh, it's a question and a comment. You know, in Canada, with disclosure of diamond resources, especially early stage resources where there's a diamond valuation that has quite a range, you know, quite a range of modeling. There's a lot of discussion about, you know, there've been a few examples where projects have not even come close to meeting the valuations projected, even in their feasibility studies. And there's just discussion on who should take responsibility for the valuation data. You know, like I've even had discussions with exchange people that said, well, your evaluator needs to be a qualified person. Well, none of the diamantaires and people like that could ever be a qualified person. So it falls on the qualified person that's writing the report to vouch for the evaluators. And that's a real tough one, especially when it's a 500 carat parcel, especially at the early stages. But even at the advanced stages, you know, people are modeling parcels with, say, 5,000 carats. And I don't know how do you have a suggestion or a mechanism that you verify or give the investor some assurances to the valuation information, I guess is the question for you.
Well, Brooke, we have pretty much the same problems and discussions here. It's not a way to get around it completely, but we just put down the qualifications of the person who does the valuation. So again, that the reader can look at it and say, Daniel did the valuation. These are his qualifications and his experience. I think I'm going to believe him, or no, I actually don't like his new haircut, so I'm not going to follow his valuation. But no, we haven't come to a reasonable way to get around that either yet. We're actually looking to see what you guys are doing so we can also follow suit.
Thank you. Great talk.
Okay. Any other questions, Herman? You and I have had discussions about compliance and the cost thereof, and the challenges that it also presents, particularly obviously to smaller companies. I mean, would we have found all these diamond deposits if we had the layers and expensive compliance that we have today?
Yeah, look, John, this is a complex topic. You know, as the diamond industry grew in Canada, I mean, basically during my career, I've seen layers and layers of compliance come in particular as a result of BRIEX. And now it's actually very expensive to have an independent competent person's report, or QP report as they are known in Canada. It's expensive to have those reports done. I can tell you that the Chidliak, which was a project that Brooke was also involved with, bringing that to the point where we had resources declared and a marketable product, which ultimately De Beers bought out the whole of Peregrine Diamonds. The technical reports that were written for Chidlak were around 200,000 Canadian dollars a piece. And there were 4 or 5 of them written during that period. So that's $1 million Canadian, just to get the technical report cycle up to the end of preliminary economic analysis. So that's that's a considerable expense, and the small guy is being excluded. That's for sure.
Herman makes a point. That isn't even a feasibility study or a pre-feasibility study. That is just a preliminary economic assessment, which makes no guarantee or vouches for mining viability, really. So just think of the cost once you start to go to pre-feasibility and feasibility.
Look, there is no doubt that there is a cost associated with it. In many cases, the costs are exorbitant. But I dare say the answer to that is consider the alternative. Have another Bre-X. Or the example of the diamonds in Cameroon that I discussed a couple of days ago, where a company listed in Korea, where they do not have any requirements, put up a valuation of their deposit. They called it a diamond reserve. They indicated that they had 786 million carats. And when they actually started mining, well, there wasn't anything there, and the company disintegrated. Now, if that, if Korea had, or the Seoul Exchange had had a code, that would never have happened. I don't know what the answer is. Somewhere in between.
Tania, can I just chip in with something? I mean, we've been discussing, what everyone would understand as a public report. If you read the definition of a public report in all of the codes, virtually any document that a professional geologist or an engineer, or that, let's just stick to geologists, that a professional geologist provides to a client could fall into the definition of a public report. And the reason I say that is because, for smaller companies and for people who are not listed, they are going to use that report to make economic decisions of their own, or they're going to use it as a basis to provide, to find private funding elsewhere. Now, it leads on also to the comment about, and since this is a course that we're giving, sort of career advice to many of the listeners too, they need to understand that as soon as you provide a professional report and you give it to someone, it goes out of your control. And even with all the disclaimers that you can put in there, whoever receives that report can use it for any purpose that he wants. And then it becomes dangerous to the professional concern. So you need to make sure that you have covered your backside as far as making sure that whoever reads that report understands what's going on. They can always pull pages out, and they do. You never give them a Word version. You always give a lot PDF. There are lots of things that you need to consider, because clients put geologists under a lot of pressure to get the results that they want, rather than the results that reflect reality. And that's the most important key thing that everyone listening in must understand: the importance of integrity in terms of the information that you provide to a client and to other people.
Very true, Bill. Thanks.
Yeah, Bill, it's a bit of a sad reflection on, on the world that we live in today. And unfortunately, I think you had a bit of a nasty experience, so you've got, scars to show for it. But I think it also goes back to, the importance of the individual's integrity And I guess, you know, we've all learned, and fortunately we've all had lots of good experience, that, you know, there's certain clients or certain banks or, you know, certain people, when they walk in the door, you just aren't going to do work for them. You know, and I guess, you know, we've both seen where work has been done and reports have been written sort of at the insistence, or shaped to the insistence of the client, you know, with downside as a consequence. So, you know, I guess the big lesson here for all of us, and particularly for young students, you know, you can't buy back your reputation, you can't buy back your integrity. So, you know, when you get into projects or you're doing work and it's not looking good, rather be honest and say, look, you know, this is not going to work, and don't expect me to, you know, write a report or sign off on it. You know, sometimes we all know it's just best to walk away from projects that we see are just not good. Okay, other questions, comments? Thanks, Tania. That was excellent and very well presented. Obviously, compliance is important, but I think if you do it properly, you know, it's and it's well presented, and you present the results as they are, and very often those results are going to, you know, be negative. And then you adhere to that line. You don't sort of bow to the client.
John, I just have to make just one more comment about the Chidliak example that I did quote.
Yeah, please.
And it's one that Brooke has also brought up. We took that to a preliminary economic analysis, which is not even there were no indicated resources declared, but it was a high confidence set of reporting and work that was done. And the result of taking it to that approach was that, you know, a major diamond company made an offer on the basis of those technical reports, which were disclosed in the public domain, prior to there being an indicated resource declared. So the flip side of compliance to the extent that we did the work at Chidliak is that you can get an investor involved at an early stage in a project if you disclose your data publicly and defensively, even before you have an indicated resource declared. So the advantage of following the codes and going through the compliance process, you know, it has the other advantages that you then have a publicly defensible set of technical data that's out there, and that people can attach a value to.
Yeah, Herman, I mean, I think that's a very valid point and well presented. I mean, I guess what you're saying is it also goes back to transparency. So, you know, if you've got a client in the background, be honest and open. You know, if you see challenges, tell them, and, you know, do it to the best of your ability. And of course, the other good thing we have today, we have all these multiple tools, which you have, you know, highlighted so well to us through the course. So yeah, compliance is important, and equally transparency. And you know, my experience of Canada, probably the best thing that the Canadian diamond discoveries did to the industry as a whole was bring about, you know, some almost, the transparency almost went overboard, but you'll know that better than me.
Mm-hmm.